All right, welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Under the Dome. I'm your host, Alan Ulrich, here with Bob Rose, and this is my new office back here now. I got kicked out of the other room, so hopefully we get a better signal in here than we got in the other room. So anyway, how you doing tonight, Bob?
I'm hanging in there. I'm back in my little cubicle corner of the living room too. The draft apocalypse is wearing down a little bit. I'm starting to sleep at least a couple consecutive hours at night, so I'll take it.
There you go. That's good. That's good. Now, I know you've been writing a lot of profiles on all the undrafted players, because of course, all the people you profiled were the guys who got drafted. None of them were guys that were undrafted. So kind of what I wanted to do tonight was kind of look at the undrafted class and look at players who we think probably have a really good chance of not only making the final 53, but also, you know, having a significant impact. Maybe not as much as Rashid Shaheed or Deontay Hardy or Harris. He was Harris when we got him the first time, but have an opportunity to become a player that is going to probably impact this team at some level as a special teams guy or something like that. I had the list up earlier and I took it down because I had so many pop-ups going on. Who by far, I have a picture of Nick Anderson on the cover, because the picture I really wanted to use, he wore a Sam Mills jersey when he got announced that he was signed a contract with the Saints, but it was his back, so you couldn't tell who the heck he was. But Nick Anderson obviously is a local product, a linebacker. He's a short linebacker like Mills was. Went to Tulane, so he's a popular name. But who is somebody that you really think has a great shot at making this team?
Let's start with Nick. I do think that Nick Anderson has a legitimately solid shot to make this squad. And I'm looking at him, because he's a linebacker, and I'm looking at the Vanderbilt linebacker, Anthony Orji. A little bit undersized too. Orji goes about 6'1", 230. Nick Anderson is even smaller than that. He's listed at 5'10", 225. But I'll tell you what, both are terrific athletes. They project for weak side linebackers that will spot. They're each aggressive against the running game, but they don't have the physicality for a strong side spot or the middle in a base defense. But each one shows good effort against the run, extremely athletic in pass defense, and as blitzers, especially Orji. I like the skill set that both of them bring to the table. And again, when it comes to undrafted guys, and you know this, Alan, you always have to look at what position they're competing at. The linebacker position, I think that there's going to be some real opportunities there. Obviously, you have Demario Davis, Pete Werner. Those guys aren't going anywhere. I've been a big fan of DeMarco Jackson since last pre-draft, but DeMarco missed all of his rookie year with an injury, so he's unproven as well. Guys like Chase Hansen, Andrew Dowell, Zach Bond, they haven't done anything for Dennis Allen's defense yet. They're special teams contributors, which is how Nick Anderson and Anthony Orji are going to make this squad. That's how you turn the coaches' heads in training camp. That's how you get the attention of your position coaches, and kind of, for lack of a better term, get your foot in the door. The fans see the plays during drills and training camp, and they see the preseason action on offense or defense, but that's not the first thing that the coaches are paying attention to. Yeah, they're watching that, but they're seeing how these guys are going to compete and add to the special teams unit. But again, if you're looking at the linebacker position, I do think that there's going to be some real opportunities there, unless the Saints go out and sign, a veteran or two. And even and there are a couple good veterans still on the market, but the last couple of years, that's what the Saints have done at the linebacker position, and those veterans have always been cut before the start of the regular season. So I think Anderson and Orji have real good shots. Because when you look at the rest of the defensive line is starting to shape up. They brought in two good free agents. They spent 2 high draft picks on the defensive line. So for anybody to crack a spot there, going to be difficult. Your secondary is stacked, although there is one kid, Anthony Johnson from Virginia, who we'll talk about in a second, that I think might have a shot. If he converts to safety, if you're focused on the defensive side of the ball, it's the linebacker spot where I think these two guys have the best shot at any of the undrafted guys they brought in on that side of the ball.
Okay, so let's kind of switch gears just a little bit since we talked about linebackers. Of the linebackers who are still out there in free agency, do you see anybody the Saints might be interested in bringing in? I know Quan Alexander is still out there, and people have fond memories of Quan.
Mm-hmm.
Who else do you see out there that the Saints probably could bring in maybe as a strong side linebacker or as depth behind either Pete Werner or Demario Davis?
And you're right. You have to start with Quan when you trigger that conversation. Because Quan is not only still a good football player, but has a lot of experience in Dennis Allen's system. Beyond that, you have a guy like an experienced vet like Anthony Barr, who has played middle and strong side. He's lost a step. There's no doubt about that. But he still brings a lot of veteran savvy to a defense. If you're looking for an athlete, then you might want to put your eyes on Miles Jack or Deion Jones. But Dennis Allen's defense is kind of complicated, and we have seen athletes kind of fail in that role. So if they bring in a veteran and they don't bring in a guy like Quan, I would expect it to be a guy who's called some defensive signals, at his previous stop. We mentioned Anthony Barr. Zach Cunningham is another name that jumps off the chart. A guy I'd love to see them bring in is Rashawn Davis, who had a career year with the Falcons last year. Rashawn Evans, excuse me. Jared Davis, who played with the Lions last year, was also a high draft pick. He's another name floating out there. These are all guys that can play the middle or the strong side, and most importantly, to your point, Alan, add depth. Because what a lot of people lose sight of is that Dennis Allen's defense, it often employs only 2 linebackers. Davis and Werner are going to be those guys, but Werner's been nicked up in each of his first 2 years. And if it weren't for Pete Werner's injury last year, we might have never gotten a chance to see what Caden Ellis could really do. That just goes to show that having depth at every position is important. So if they do bring in a veteran guy, like I said, I think it's a guy. If it's not a Quan Alexander, then I think it's going to be a guy that has experience, calling the defensive signals through with other teams, because that tells you that the guy's got a good, solid football IQ, can digest a defensive system fairly quickly, and probably has a little bit of versatility to offer at the position.
Well, and that's interesting you mentioned all those categories, because one name that pops up, Deion Jones, the ex-Falcon and now ex-Cleveland Brown inside linebacker. Do you see a guy like him maybe coming to this defense for depth?
I think it's possible. And they've certainly seen a lot of Deion Jones over the years. And like you said, he's a wonderful athlete. But the knock on Deion was one of the similar knocks that was on Stephon Anthony when he was with the Saints. Terrific athlete, but has a big problem diagnosing opposing offenses. Now, as long as you have Demario Davis in the building, you're not going to be asking a Deion Jones or anybody else to make the defensive calls, but you're going to need him when he is on the field, you're going to need him to make the correct reads and not be out of position, because that becomes a liability, especially since Allen's system does ask so much of your linebackers. Jones certainly has the athleticism to cover sideline to sideline, even in a two-backer alignment, but you really have to question his defensive awareness.
Yeah, I find that he's a little too small for this defense too,
Mm-hmm.
which that fit a Dan Quinn kind of a defense, that they like small, fast linebackers like that, but not the kind of defense the Saints employ. The other name that pops up that's not Quan Alexander is Miles Jack.
Yeah.
I think they tried using him as inside linebacker in the 3-4 scheme that the Steelers still run, and that doesn't seem to really be his strength. Would a guy like Miles Jack work in this kind of defense?
Frankly, I'd take Miles Jack before I would Deion Jones in this defense, because Miles Jack, although he's a couple years older than Deion, he's better in coverage. I feel more confident with him in coverage, because again, with Deion Jones, it's the whole awareness aspect that worries me about him. Miles Jack, like you said, he struggled a lot in that Steelers scheme last year, but they put a lot on their linebackers, just as Dennis Allen puts a lot on his linebackers, but in a different kind of way. I think Miles Jack would be able to handle the coverage aspect of a Dennis Allen defensive scheme. The run defense would be a little bit of a question mark as far as Miles is concerned with me. But again, they brought in those, 3-4 defensive linemen this offseason specifically to shore up that run defense. So if they're doing their job up front, that's going to make the life of any linebacker a hell of a lot easier. So like I said, between the two, you asked me to pick between Miles Jack and Deion Jones for a Dennis Allen scheme. I'd rather have Miles Jack.
Yeah, I was looking at Miles Jack. He's 6'1", 244. So he's a little undersized height-wise, but he is over the 240 range. So that's more in the line of what the Saints like to see in their linebackers. So the question here with Miles Jack is, he's still looking for a big paycheck somewhere.
Yeah.
I think he's one of those guys, if you're going to bring somebody in like that, you're probably going to bring them in right before training camp, or after you got a good look at the linebackers you've got on your roster, including the 2 undrafted free agents, and see how they do and how it looks out there, and whether or not you think you need a veteran guy to come in and try and help out. That's where I think a guy like Quan could fit in, probably in the first couple of weeks of training camp. If they don't like what they're seeing, they could bring a guy like him back.
I don't think there's any question about it, because like you said, they have the rookie camp coming up this weekend. Then they have a couple of mini camps and OTAs coming up. They're going to get a chance to get a real good look at these guys, and that's what they're going to want to do. Because again, you already know what you have in DeMario and Pete. Now what you want to do is get a feel for how comfortable you're going to be with youthful, unproven depth. And if there's any question at all, that's when they're going to double back and hit the free agent market like you suggested.
Yeah, and the only other name that's out there that kind of leaps out at me, and this is old Saints fan talking, Anthony Barr, ex-Viking. Generally, if you've kicked the Saints' ass in a playoff game, you probably get a good shot at coming to join the Saints roster. I don't know if Anthony Barr, he is 30 now, 31. He's 30 years old. Okay. He's a 9-year veteran. You're looking at, again, that's another guy that you're probably looking at, and we may sign him for veteran depth because we don't like what we have out there right now. But he does play outside linebacker. He can play the strong side position. I just don't know how good he would be in coverage anymore at 30. That didn't seem to be his strong suit now at this age. And, he played a long time with the Vikings and played 1 year with Dallas, and Dallas isn't going to re-sign him. How do you see that, a guy like Anthony Barr?
I tell you, there's not many Minnesota Vikings that I've liked ever. But Anthony Barr is one guy that I respected when my teams went up against his defense. A hard nosed, old school type linebacker.
Mhm.
Against the run. In his prime, he was not a liability in coverage. He's not the kind of guy you want man on man. Against an Alvin Kamara or a Jawan Johnson type of player in the open field. But he had good awareness in zone drops. It never got too shallow. Never gave up an easy throw in front of him. So, good football awareness in zone duties. But like you said, over the last couple of years, it's been clear that he's lost his step. That's why the Vikings were I'm not going to say eager, but ready to move on from him 2 years ago, and kind of floundered in the Dallas scheme last year. So like you said, if they bring a guy like Anthony Barr in, that is purely for depth. That's saying that they have some confidence in their young backup linebackers. But if they need a guy to play right away in a pinch, they would feel a little bit more comfortable bringing in an experienced veteran, knowing that it's only going to be a year, spot starter, early down kind of guy, to help kind of mentor, while the younger guys develop.
Yeah, and Jimmy Gumbo mentioned Quan Alexander. We started the conversation about the free agent ones with Quan. The only thing I have to say about Quan is you really have to wonder. The Saints didn't sign him last year, and I know it was about making him a backup player, and he still thought he could start somewhere. I don't know if those positions have changed at all after losing Caden Ellis, but Quan is someone who's out there, at least has the experience if you absolutely had to have somebody. But, I think at this point, we're probably not going to see anybody come in until training camp starts and they get a good look at what they have out there right now and if they think they need an upgrade. Okay, so the other position that the Saints did not address, and now they do have a need for, is tight end. In the undrafted free agent class, only signed one tight end. A kid by the name of hang on here. I had to switch to my phone because my every time I would do it on my computer, whatever site I was on with these names, it kept knocking out my camera. So.
It's Joe Wilson from Central Michigan.
Yeah.
I'm actually releasing a profile on him tomorrow morning on the Saints News Network.
Real quick, what kind of tight end is this? Is this more of a pass catching tight end, or is he more of a run blocker, or kind of not much of either one?
Without being too disrespectful, I'd probably stray towards the latter. But his skill set, he was what they call a move tight end, receiving specialist. Actually has good soft hands, and ran a decent sized, decent variation of a route tree at Central Michigan. As far as a blocker goes, he's willing. He has good technique, but he needs to add weight and strength to be any value at the point of attack. He's a real lean athlete, goes about 6'3", 240, 245 range. So he has the frame to add the bulk. And like I said, it's not that his blocking technique was poor, at least that I saw on film. He's just not going to be able to withstand the real physical linebackers or the defensive ends at the point of attack, which is what the Saints need for their offense at that position right now. So he had, even at a thin depth chart at this position, he has an uphill climb to make the active roster.
Okay, so at this point in agency, you're pretty much scraping the bottom of the barrel. I mean, Mercedes Lewis is the one that keeps getting talked about outside of Foster Moreau, and people are like, Mercedes Lewis, is he still in the league? I mean, but yeah, you're looking at Foster Moreau, who we know the Saints actually have a contract offer sitting
Mhm.
out there for him, but there's also other teams interested in him. There's a Jeff Swaim for the Titans. Cameron Brate, who the Saints had on their practice squad at one time many years ago, and he's been with the Bucks, so there's a lot of familiarity with him. Michael Wilcox from the Bengals, Mercedes Lewis, like I said. I'm probably going to pronounce his names wrong, but Michael Pruitt
Mhm.
from the Falcons. Tyler Croft, the backup tight end for the 49ers. Another familiar name, Nick Vannett, who played with the Giants. I doubt he would come back. Ryan Griffin with the Bears. And Max Williams with the Arizona Cardinals. Of that motley crew, Foster Moreau, we can kind of push us aside right now because we do know there's an offer out to him. But if he were to sign with someone else, who else kind of pick your interest there to see if that could be a guy that the Saints could bring in as maybe an inline tight end or a blocking tight end that could possibly go out for some passes, catch 15, 20 balls, maybe not much, be the Josh Hill.
And that's just it. You have to consider what the Saints need and would be looking for at the position. Juwan Johnson's your pass catcher, and he is a pretty darn good receiver. So that kind of rules out a guy like Max Williams, and a guy like Kyle Rudolph, or probably even a guy like Cameron Brate. You want to go, you want to lean more towards a blocking specialist, which Michael Pruitt. Was a heck of an inline blocker for the Falcons last year. Jeff Swaim, before playing for the Titans, who have a run heavy scheme. He was considered the blocking tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. Doesn't look it. He looks like a bulked up receiver, but he's a good blocker. Adam Shaheen from the Dolphins. Was the blocking specialist, between he and Mike Gesicki for Miami. Anthony Ferkser. Also filled in, and did a decent job for the Falcons. And you mentioned Michael Wilcox too. Wilcox has been a blocking specialist throughout his career. None of these guys are going to make you bring back fond memories of a Jimmy Graham or a Jeremy Shockey or even a Benjamin Watson as far as receiving goes. But again, all they need is someone to hold the point of attack, and see, kind of open up the edge, for those runs outside, maybe as an extra pass protector, in certain alignments as well. None of them are going to be guys that are going to be threatening downfield. Obviously, the Saints aren't looking for that because for the last 2 years, they bypassed several of those kind of players in free agency. And this past year, what I thought was a very deep draft class, they didn't even consider one, at least strongly enough, to be linked to any, through any of their 7 draft choices. So, it's now obviously the interest in Foster Moreau is there. He'd be a great fit once healthy. But remember, even if they are successful in signing Foster Moreau to a contract, we already know that he's dealing with health problems. Now, it's a good sign, that those health problems at least weren't as serious as what was originally suspected if he's ready to sign a contract already. But you still have to assume he's going to spend at least the first couple of months or so on the non-football injury list, because he has to be medically cleared to step onto that field. So they still need a body at that position. Could it be an undrafted guy? I mean, maybe, but Josh Wilson, Lucas Krull, the guy they signed last year, those guys aren't blockers. So this is still a legitimate need for this team. It is an inline blocker. Forget receiving. I just need a guy who's not going to be a liability, when he lines up outside of either one of the tackles.
Yeah, that's why I was looking at like a Jeff Swain or Ryan Griffin even, who you didn't mention much of. But, with the Texans and the Lions, he's more of an inline blocker. he can go out there and catch some passes, but he's not really going to be a receiving threat. But he's 6'6", 255. He's got some size and some power to him. He can block. And given that the Saints are probably going to run the ball more than they pass it, I would think that a blocking tight end, inline blocking tight end, isn't going to really tip off what the Saints are going to do any more than, going to, a 11 or 12 package, which they have been doing. Foster Moreau, he's the guy we really need because he's a guy who can catch and block. But I would like to see them bring in a blocking tight end to replace Adam Trotman. And at least one of those guys outside of Foster will probably be on the Saints roster by camp. I think that's a move you will see in the next few weeks. Them bring in at least one, if not two tight ends, veteran tight ends. Okay, so let's get back to some more of the undrafted free agents because those are the two biggest needs. Getting that linebacker, getting that tight end. But some of the other positions are really interesting to me. The receivers / kick returners. I know we talked a little about it at the end of the show last week. I really wanted to focus more on it this week. But, you got Cy Barnett from Davenport. Let's see. There was a couple others on here. Where's my list? Shaq Davis, South Carolina State. And there was one more. Where is he?
Malik Flowers, Montana.
Yeah, Malik Flowers. It's not on my list. Why is it not on my list? This is my list, and he's missing. Oh, bastards. Okay, yeah, Malik Flowers. And Malik Flowers is the one I really want to talk about, too, because I think he's got the best shot of making this team as a kick returner, which is how Hardy made the team, which is how Shaheed made the team. And we can go all the way back to Pierre Thomas. That's where Pierre Thomas really made his mark as a player. And, of course, Michael Lewis was an undrafted free agent. Lance Moore was an undrafted free agent. So it's about your ability to play special teams. And I think Malik Flowers is probably the most intriguing name of the names I just said of the current undrafted free agent crop that really has a shot at not only making this team, but also having an impact. Now, he's not a speed burner like Shaheed and Hardy, but he can really set up his blocks extremely well. And he's got great vision out there. Tell me a little bit about Malik, say his last name for me.
Flowers, and it's okay. We're both going to do it throughout training. I
almost said Malik Willis. I know it's not Malik Willis. It's because that guy's in the news because the Titans are talking about releasing him already. This is my shocked face. Okay,
right?
You're talking about this. They were talking about this guy being a first-round draft pick, and I'm like, come on, man. He played at Liberty. He transferred from Auburn to Liberty. And I watched him play when UL played Liberty. And, he could run around. And, he could throw a pretty deep ball and stuff like that. But he's not a quarterback, not an NFL quarterback. He is a college / let's get the guys drinking and relive the old days kind of quarterback. I don't mean to be ugly, but he's got a lot of talent, but he doesn't have the skills to play at the next level. And that's what really showed when he was at Liberty even. And he didn't get the coaching to get him to that level. So, there's a shitload of talent that did not get drafted and are not in the NFL. Great players, but it's more. There's more to the NFL, playing the NFL quarterback position than having a strong arm and being able to run fast. So, but let's go to Malik Flowers. Talk about him and his play.
I'll tell you, it's tough finding film on some of these guys. Entire game film anyway, but. Like you said, if Malik Flowers makes this team, it's going to be in the same way that Deontay Harris made it, in the same way that Rashid Shaheed made it. It's going to be because he made enough plays in practice as a receiver, and was very, very consistent and explosive as a returner, and he has those qualities. I mean, first of all, he comes into the NFL with 7 kick returns throughout his collegiate career. That's an NCAA record at the FCS and FBS level. He's tied for the career record with Rashid Shaheed, his new New Orleans Saints teammate. But like you said, Hardy was a burner. Shaheed is a burner. Flowers, he has good speed, don't get me wrong. But what stood out to me was his vision in the open field. I mean, he'll spot a crease, be able to cut on a dime, and accelerate through. He was a 110-meter hurdle champion in high school. So that tells you that he has good speed. But hurdlers are a different breed. You have to have good speed to be a hurdler, but you have to be extremely agile as well. And that explains the one cut ability that I was talking about. Flowers, he was, and it's not like he had these touchdown returns in spurts. He averaged nearly 30 yards a return, kickoff return, through his entire college career. That's special. I don't care what kind of competition that you're playing against. Like I said, he has great vision and acceleration, but he also has nice elusiveness, and decent size. He's 6'2", over 200, and he plays with some strength. So when somebody does get a hit on him, as a kick returner or punt returner, he maintains excellent balance. He's able to like someone laid a hit on Deontay Harris, he was down. That was it. That's the case with most kick returners. This guy is just as likely to bounce off of you or regain his footing in a snap, and spot a peripheral lane and then accelerate through it for an extra 20 yards. That's what impressed me most about him. Now, obviously, just as was the case with Harris, just as was the case with Shaheed, he'll have to prove that he can do it as a receiver against significantly stepped up competition. You're jumping from the Big Sky Conference to now the NFL, and go. But fortunately, he's going to be going against one of the better defensive backfields in the entire NFL. So he'll be tested, and the coaches realize this. Like I said, he's not the interesting thing, to me, the Saints for the last 3 or 4 years have kept 6 receivers on the active roster into the regular season. The main reason they've done that is because they want that 6th guy to be a special teams guy, specifically for returner. You have to fit, Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, Shaheed, and probably Brian Edwards. They have your top 4 spots sewn up. Going to be between, you would think, between A.T. Perry, and Trash Quan Smith for that number 5 spot. But I think, given the role that Rashid Shaheed had in this offense down the stretch, that the Saints would be wise to limit Shaheed's touches on special teams.
Yes.
But to be able to do that, they need another guy to step up. Kirk Merritt, he has some decent experience returning kicks, but I think that this is the real opportunity where Malik Flowers can actually steal a roster spot, force these coaches to keep 6 receivers. And then again, once you have your foot in the door, like you said at the onset of the show, once you have your foot in the door, even if it is only on special teams, you could carve out a career on special teams, and maybe turn some heads and get some offensive snaps. And we saw what Rashid Shaheed did with limited offensive snaps last year, and managed to expand that into a very significant role down the stretch. I'm not saying that Malik Flowers has that kind of ability, but he has the ability to make these coaches, to force these coaches to keep an extra return specialist on this roster.
I was looking up while you were talking, because he reminds me, and don't ask me why, but he reminds me of Kenny Duckett, the Saints kick returner from the early 80s under Bum Phillips. He only played 3 seasons for the Saints, only played, I think, 5 seasons total in the NFL. And mainly it was because of his diabetes. He was a guy that really, he shouldn't have been playing football because he had that bad a case of diabetes. That's partially why he had to leave the game, and unfortunately, he passed away at the young age of 38 back in 1998 because of kidney failure resulting from the diabetes. But he has a chance because he was brought in as a receiver, and he's about the same size. He's a little bit smaller. He was 6 foot, 185 pounds for the Saints. Kenny Duckett was. So a little bit smaller. But I think Malik Flowers has a chance to do what that guy did. In 1983, Duckett had 19 catches for 283 yards and 2 touchdowns and 719 kickoff return yards. And if you think about the Bum Phillips offense, I know 19 catches for 283 yards and 2 touchdowns doesn't sound like much, but for Bum Phillips, that probably puts you in the top 5 receiving category because you're looking at, you had Jeff Groth, you had Eugene Goodlow, and you had his old favorite that came with him over from Houston, like so many players did, Guido Merkins. Number 19 was also a receiver on that team. So, these are the guys. And then, of course, Lindsey Scott, who couldn't catch a cold. He was running naked in Antarctica. But that's beside the point. But, I mean, those are the targets that Kenny Stabler and Dave Wilson were throwing to. So if he could have an impact sort of like that, be a kick returner, getting better field position, getting as close to midfield, and have a minor role as a receiver, maybe it's the 5th option, so you don't have to deal with Trash Quan Smith anymore. The names everybody keeps throwing out right now, and I think he's going to be a camp darling until the pads come on, is A.T. Perry. Is Perry going to be receiver number 4? People put him up as high as receiver number 3 sometimes, which he's not going to be there. But if he can be receiver number 4, and he could do some things, and Michael Thomas can stay healthy, Chris Olave does not go into a sophomore slump, you really have something there. You've got your speed guys, you've got some underneath guys, and you got guys that they're not going to cover because who's this guy coming? I don't know who that is, and if he just catches a few passes, you're golden, because Derek Carr, just like Drew Brees, likes to spread the ball around.
Yeah.
So I really, Calvin called him flip the field specialist, and that's really what you need. You really need a guy who can get those positive yards, get you out past close to midfield, because if things are going right, you only need to go 20 or 30 yards. You're in scoring range already. So, I'm hoping that this really works out. Yeah, I agree. I think Perry has a good shot of really working out this year. The more I watch of him, the more I like what I see out of him. I know he fell to the 6th round, and I went through the entire Saints draft history, and the only player in 57 years, the only player who really panned out as a 6th round pick is Fred McAfee in 1991. Now, granted, we don't have a lot of 6th round picks in our Saints history, but of the players you got, the 3rd round's the best. 3rd round, I can list a whole slew of names. Pat Swilling, Jimmy Graham, Dalton Hilliard, Reuben Mays. I mean, you just go down the list. Dalton Hilliard was a 2nd round pick, but you got a lot of players. 6th round, 5th round is good. Carl Nix, Thomas Morstead. You got a lot of good players that came out of that round. 6th round's a damn nightmare.
It is.
7th round, of course, Marcus Colston, Zach Strief, Eric Martin, who people forget about. Eric Martin was a 7th round draft pick in 1985. So, it's just, there's certain rounds I look at and I go, yeah, that's a good round for the Saints. Whenever they give up a 6th-round pick, I'm like, that's all right. Whoever you draft the 6th round ain't going to make this team anyway. So, but how about the other guys, the other receivers that they brought in as undrafted guys? A guy like Shaq Davis, wide receiver, South Carolina State. What does he bring to the table?
Size. He's a monster. He's 6'5", 217, and he already plays very strong, and can add bulk to that frame. There's no doubt about it. Has great wingspan, good leaping ability, so he high points the ball very well, and he can not only jump out of the gym, as the saying goes, but he has good in-air body control too. The issues that I have with Shaq is, oh my God, his hands are awful. Truly awful hands. We're not talking about concentration drops. We're talking about, I forget the character's name, but they called him Stone Hands in the movie, Necessary Roughness. And
don't remind me. Traquan was a 3rd-round pick.
There are outliers to every rule.
Yeah, exactly.
And Shaq Davis has 0 route precision too. I mean, he rounds off his breaks something horrible. Runs a very limited route tree as it is. He has a lot of physical attributes that are going to jump off the page. He is the kind of guy. He's the kind of guy that could make a couple head-turning plays and all of a sudden be this year's Adrian Arrington or Brandon Coleman or someone like that. But I mean, the reality is, whether it's Shaq Davis or Cy Barnett, they're going to have their work cut out for them. I know it's easy to forget that A.T. Perry was a 6th-round pick. I mean, how he has the skills to be a day 2 pick, which is when I was calling for him. And I've been on the A.T. Perry bandwagon since last year. I mean, I love his game. So, if you want to count me among the people that think that A.T. Perry could have an impact for the Saints, it won't be this year, not if Michael Thomas stays healthy. But A.T. Perry could be a real find. And if I'm right about him, then I don't see Shaq Davis or Cy Barnett, the Davenport kid, being able to crack this active roster. But keep in mind, the Saints always like to stash 2 or 3 receivers on their practice squad. Shaq Davis, just with that wingspan, and physicality alone, he is probably worth a practice squad spot. If I'm right and he doesn't have the consistency to make the active roster, then you almost have to keep a guy with those kind of physical tools on your practice squad.
Yeah, and that's how I feel about all these receivers too, because I think the Saints will probably stash a couple of them there. Lance Moore actually signed in the practice squad in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Had a limited role in 2006, and it really was 2007, 2008 when Lance became the receiver that we all know and love. So there was a growth, and he came from Toledo, little college. Mm-hmm. So there was a growth pattern to watch. So if they don't make the roster this year, it doesn't mean the end of the world. I think they do stash them and see if they can do something with them next year. So of the other players, we'll talk about the specialists later, but there's several offensive linemen on the team. Mark Evans from Arkansas Pine Bluff, a guy that the Saints, a school that the Saints have gone to before. Teron Armstead came from Arkansas Pine Bluff, but this guy isn't Teron Armstead.
No.
But Mark Evans, Alex Filstrom, and it was one other guy, another offensive lineman, I thought. That might be it. Okay, I thought they had a guard. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, but of those two, Do you think either one has a shot at becoming the next Tim Lolito, Calvin Throckmorton? Just go down the list of undrafted free agent finds. DePuente, all these undrafted free agent finds the Saints seem to find in the offensive line. Is
Uh,
there a guy out there to like?
sure, they have a shot, yeah, but they're going to have to unseat guys that were in their position not too long ago. Calvin Throckmorton, Lewis Kidd, two players that that the coaches are very high on. And remember, they brought in Storm Norton in free agency.
Yeah.
They just drafted Nick Saldivari, in the fourth round, traded up to get Nick. So they obviously feel pretty high about him. There's some, typically the Saints keep 9 to 10 active offensive linemen. Your starting five is going to be easy to predict. And then you look after that. Throckmorton has too much starting experience to move on from very easily. Hurst is going to be your first backup. If Penning does indeed win the starting job. So that's two of those spots. Saldivari, you invested some pretty fairly high draft capital to get. So that's three of the 4 or 5 spots. And then you have Lewis Kidd, Landon Young, Storm Norton, all with veteran experience, young veteran experience that these guys are going to have to overcome. So I just don't see it happening. Philstrom, he's a tackle, a tackle build, prototype tackle build, but has decent feet. He's the kind of guy. Somebody actually suggested, can they make him lose weight, and move him to tight end?
That's where he started.
Yeah, right. He has that kind of agility, but I don't know that you want to make a guy lose that kind of weight at the NFL level. Of the two, though, it's Evans. Evans is the more intriguing to me because he has that tackle guard versatility that the Saints love. And again, just like two things that you can bank on. The Saints are going to stash 2 or 3 wide receivers, and they're going to stash 2 or 3 offensive linemen on their practice squad. That's just the way they do business. More often than not, those offensive lines, especially in the last couple years, with the plague of injuries, these linemen will get opportunities. It's more likely, and you already pointed this out. It's more likely that a rookie practice squad offensive lineman is going to see some starting time at some point in his NFL career. The offensive line is a position, especially with the proper coaching, that you can develop rapidly and also later into a guy's career. So I look for these guys. Again, they're going to have uphill climbs to make the roster, but Landon Young was a late round pick. You mentioned Lolito, Throckmorton, Lewis Kidd. They're all undrafted guys, so it's certainly possible they could unseat one of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jinx this team, but it's never failed. If the injury bug comes through, the first place it likes to hit the Saints is in the offensive line, and the second place it likes to hit the Saints is in receiving room.
Yeah,
but you've already gotten Andres Pete, who it's not a question of if he stays healthy, it's when he gets hurt. So you kind of geared up for that already with your rookie. That you drafted this year from Old Dominion. Penning he had a medical red shirt kind of season. He was seen without a walking boot, so he is ahead on his recovery, but he has yet to start a full season.
Right.
So you have a question mark at left tackle. Now you do have a reliable backup who can play tackle guard. But a guy like Mark Evans, I think he's a little undersized, believe it or not, 6'2.5", 303, but he's got the personality that they like in their offensive lineman. He's got a mean streak to him. He's nasty. He's a physical run blocker. I think he's probably has a good shot at competing for that third tackle position, but I think his future really is probably going to be inside at guard.
Agreed.
So I'm really interested to watch how he develops in training camp. I don't think he's ready to go this year, but I think after a season of coaching, because the Saints offensive line, despite all the shifting parts and so forth, was a strength last year.
Mhm.
Um, Considering the injuries that you had, you know, most of the sacks I felt that well in the beginning of the season I thought um, Jameis Winston took a lot of unnecessary sacks, but he
Yeah.
got the crap beat out of him. But most of the sacks I felt that were on Andy Dalton were just times he was holding that ball too long.
Yeah.
Waiting for that guy to come open and not anticipating him breaking open and throwing him open. But for the most part, I thought the offensive line did a good job of protecting the quarterback and opening running lanes when they needed to, especially when Taysom Hill was back there. If Taysom is coming, he's running between the tackles. He's getting, he's getting positive yardage. So I think a guy like Mark Evans could be a next Tim Alito, could be somebody who unseats Throckmorton, because I think he has the temperament of more what they're looking for. So that brings us to the last two guys. The kicker from Notre Dame, Blake Group, and the tattooed one, the punter, Lou Headley. And there's so many Headley Lamar jokes we can make from Blazing Saddles. But because my son, I know, wants him to make this team just so he can call him Hetty, Lou Hetty, and have him go, it's Headley. But the punter from Miami. Do either of these guys have a shot at unseating Lutz or Gillikin?
Truthfully, Alan, I don't think so. Both Lutz and Gillikin had off years last year. There's no doubt about it. And I think the Saints went out of their way to bring in extra legs, for this training camp to make them feel a little bit of competition. It would not surprise me whatsoever, if they kept both a kicker and or a punter onto their practice squad for just in case, especially with Gillikin. I expect Lutz to have a better year than he did last year, because one thing about Lutz that people are forgetting, not only was he coming off season-ending surgery that cost him the whole year the year before, he was also working with a brand new holder. He had never worked with anybody except Thomas Morstead. Morstead was gone by the time Lutz took the field again. Gillikin was his holder. That makes a subtle enough difference. In the 40-yard range, 40-plus yard range, where Lutz had most of his struggles, actually outside of 35 yards. So I do expect Lutz to have a better year. Gillikin, again, his struggles were with inconsistency. He still showed the ability to boom a kick out of trouble. He still showed the incredible accuracy that you just don't see from an average punter. We were spoiled for so many years with Thomas Morstead, and then before that with Hansen. Gillikin still showed he could do those things. He just wasn't as consistent. So it would take a monumental effort by either Headley or the Notre Dame kicker, plus a monumental collapse by either Lutz or Gillikin for anything significant to change at those two positions.
Well, in Gillikin, they did, like you said, they did stash in the practice squad because they saw something in him. I think if they really like either of those guys, chances are they will stash them and let the veterans go and kick one more year. And to me, if Lutz struggles again early this season, I think every Monday or Tuesday is going to be kicker tryout day out there.
That could be, yeah. Yeah, because Lutz is making a pretty hefty penny for a kicker too.
Yeah. And excuse me. During the off season, I like to watch old Saints games because I'm just like that. But I throw in old Saints games on Sundays on YouTube. And I'll watch them from the 70s and the 80s. Obviously, there's more games from the 80s and the 90s than there are from the 70s. The weird thing is, no games from 2000 outside of the playoff game
No,
are
I
out there.
know.
None of them. I can find the ESPN primetime highlights of all the games, but try and find an Saints Atlanta game from 2000. You can't find it. It's not there. And it's the weirdest thing because that's really a fun season to watch because as fans entered the 2000 season with so little expectation. The expectation was so low that it was kind of like 1987. It took a while for the fans to realize, hey, this is a pretty good team and it may do something. Because I'd like to watch the Bears Saints game from the 2000 season again at Soldier Field, only because that was the game where you realize that we could be doing something special. Ricky Williams had a big game. Joe Horn famously caught a touchdown in the end zone, standing there by himself. You saw something. That's when the team seemed to be coming together. And I always point to the 2000 season as that's the fun Saints teams.
Mhm.
The Saints teams that you expect to go to the playoffs and to go on to championships and things like that. Yeah, it's fun. And 2009 was, don't get me wrong, 2009, 2011, 2018, they had a lot of fun games to watch. But that 2017 season was a little more fun than 18 because, man, all of a sudden you got this winning streak going on. And that I'll point to that Redskins Saints game as probably the best game of the year because of the comeback and how exciting that was, because fans were leaving with 5 minutes left and the Saints are down by two scores and they come back and win that game in overtime. And people were just like, this was an unbelievable game, So, I like watching those games, but the reason why I'm mentioning that I do this is because it's funny to watch Morton Anderson in those early 80s games and the mid 80s games because Morton Anderson struggled a lot more than people remember.
He did.
There were a lot of games where he is struggling to make field goals. And there's a 1988 game against the Redskins in Washington in our old RFK, and John Madden and Pat Summer are all doing the game. And the Redskin fans and the Washington Post sports writers were all commenting how Morton Anderson is a dome kicker. He can't kick in the grass. He's going to struggle kicking in the grass because in 1987, you watch some of those games where the Saints play it like a candlestick and they play at Anaheim. Anderson slips a lot when he was kicking. The game they won after they lost in the Dome and the revenge game against the 49ers in the 87 season, the game-winning field goal, which actually happened the last series, it wasn't the end of the game, but Anderson slides because the grass really gave way and that ball just barely made it over the crossbar. And it was only like I say only, like I could do this, but it was like a 47 to 51 yard field goal, somewhere in that range. So, it's really, we all remember Morton Anderson as the Great Dane kicking all the game winning field goals, especially in the Dome. But forgetting in those early years that there were some games where you're like, man, I hope he makes this thing.
Yeah.
So, and I say that because Lutz actually has been a better kicker early in his career than Morton Anderson was. But the problem with Lutz is you set those high expectations and you start to go down, whereas Anderson was low in the beginning and then kind of worked his way up. It's just that, and we've already lived through Morton Anderson and Doug Bryan and, John Carney and those guys. So, if you start missing 2 or 3 kicks, like, oh, you suck, you can cut him, get rid of him. It's amazing. It really is. And the other thing about Anderson too is he missed his rookie season. Did you know that he missed almost his whole rookie season? Well, of course, it was a strike year too, but he was on injured reserve his rookie season because his first kickoff, he sat back and watched how far he kicked it and wasn't paying attention. And some guy cleaned his clock. I think he forgot where he was, being lost in the moment, and he got hit. And there's another game against the Oilers, I think, where they take a cheap shot at him, and some Saints players took exception to it, because they knew Anderson's reputation. So it's always fun to go back and look at those games. I watched the games they won, by the way. The only time I ever watched the games they lost, I watched the first half of the first game of the 79 season between the Saints and the Falcons. I turned it off at halftime and switched to the game because the problem with the 79 Saints is for about a half, they look like world beaters. They're awesome.
Yeah.
They can score at will. And then the other half, it looks like this is the first time anyone's picked up a football in their lives. I mean, blocks just getting blown. Chuck Muncie carrying the ball out here. Archie throwing these god-awful picks. Like, what were you throwing to? Who were you looking at? And the same the Raiders game, Saints Raiders Monday night.
I was just going to mention that one. That was my first real memory of New Orleans Saints football. Was that game Monday night? At that age, I always we had a bedtime. I was seven and a half years old. But the way we had our 2.5 level story house, the TV was in the corner of the living room, and on the third, it was either the third or fourth step down, I could creep down and watch the game. Watch the game through the holes in the banister. And I knew it was an old house. It was built in the 1880s. I knew the creaks, the spots where the floor creaked in every spot of the house. So if you couldn't see my parents sitting on the couch, but I could hear them get up off the couch. So I would hurry up and scamper back to my room. That was the first Saints game I remember watching.
I got to watch that game, and I've told the story a million times. I'll tell it one more time. But I got to watch that game. I had to go to bed by because back then Monday Night Football started at 8:00 Central Time, 9:00 out in the East Coast. I had to be in bed by halftime on Monday Night Football. I could watch the first half, so that's about 9:00, 9:15. If I was good, I would beg my parents to let me stay up and watch the halftime highlights by Howard Cosell. So I got to watch that. Well, because the Saints were playing, my parents let me stay up until about midway through the third quarter. When it was 35-14 and Kenny Bordelon, ex-LSU player, Kenny Bordelon picked off the pass and ran it back for a touchdown. It got to be 35-14. My parents said, all right, you have to go to bed now. It's almost 10 o'clock. You've got to go to bed. You won't be able to get up for school in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to win this game. Go to bed. And I was all happy. I'm thinking to myself, man, we're going to the playoffs. I get to, next week is going to be the game that we're going to, because I went to the game the next week against the Chargers. Oh, where's John? John needs to hear that. I did go to the next game versus the Chargers. I did not go to that Monday night game. But I'm going to bed. I'm all happy. Man, we're going to go to the playoffs. That's going to be cool. We're finally going to get a winning season. And the next morning I got up, and my dad would always put the morning paper on the kitchen table and leave the kitchen light on over the table. And this is such a 70s thing. You remember the basket looking? There we go. I was at that game. I knew somebody would say it. I was not at this one, though. But the wicker basket looking lamp shades with the big globe on the bottom. That's what we had over the kitchen table. And we had the little white table with the yellow seats and the white plastic kind of curly Q kind of backs to it. And I came walking up, look at the newspaper. I couldn't wait to read how we won this game and second coming headlines and font. And that's, world ends kind of. That's what we call second coming. Jesus coming kind of font. They lost. And I'm like, how could we? And I look at the score, I'm like, how could they done? There wasn't enough time left in the game for this to happen. Yeah, so yeah,
That's how I got busted, because I remember asking my dad the next day, what was the final score of the game, and he told me, and I said, what? I said it was 35-14 midway through the third quarter, and I'm like, oh, shit.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, and this year will make 40 years. This December, December 18th, will make 40 years since the infamous Mike Lansford kick in 1983 that kept the Saints out of the playoffs. Because the following week, unfortunately, in '79, the following week, I went to the game, the Saints Chargers, and the Chargers just demolished the Saints 35-0. That ended the Saints any hope the Saints had of making the playoffs at all. They were terrible. They called it the Monday morning hangover. Because it was so bad. They were so bad in that game. But yeah, the Mike Lansford kick, and that's another game that's not available on YouTube for whatever reason. Because I have watched it a grand total of one time since '83. It was on YouTube briefly, and that's another game where you're like, going, how did you lose this game?
Yeah.
Well, you lost it because you threw an interception. You allowed a kickoff return for a touchdown, a punt return for a touchdown, something like that. A fumble recovery for a touchdown. Because you look at the stats. The Rams did nothing until the final drive.
Nope.
And that game, when I was at the NFC Championship game against the Vikings in 2009, my wife is like, we're going to lose this game. We're going to lose this game. When Brett Favre's driving down the field, and we are going towards the same end zone that Lansford kicked that field goal. And I'm like, it can't happen again. It can't. It's not going to happen again. Stop thinking like that. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, if he gets down to this thing, gets to the 30-yard line, and kick a fucking field goal, after all 13-3 and all that, oh my God. So seasons where you expect them to win are not nearly as much fun as seasons when you have no expectations.
No doubt.
And they win. And I'm saying all this in a very, very long story way, hoping that I'm not going to have any expectations for this team this year, other than the NFC South sucks and we have a good shot of doing something. But I don't expect them to advance or get to the playoffs. I'm just hoping that we have a good season. Is that fair to say for you as well?
Yeah. And I'm torn, and I make myself angry when I do this, because I look at, when I was on the Jordy Hallberg show, we touched a little bit on scheduling. We poked fun at my good friend Goodell for making everything a TV event now, and bullshit like that. But we talked about we were in both in agreement that the Saints have the second easiest schedule according to winning percent. All that's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Because the NFL just changes too much from year to year.
Yeah.
But truthfully, I look at this schedule, and by the Goodell is going to schedule that game in Green Bay in either late November or December. You just know he is.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, they get 3 playoff teams at home. 3 playoff teams are playoff contender. I consider the Lions a playoff contender at home. They don't have, outside of Green Bay, they don't have any bad weather games now that the New England game is presumably going to be in Germany. So it's easy to look at the schedule and say, you know what? I see 11 or 12 wins. But I said that last year too. Mm-hmm. So that I make myself angry. I get the same way. I try not to be too optimistic, but it's hard. Especially when you love this draft, like I loved it. I love the signing of Carr. I love pretty much all the moves they made this offseason. And then you start playing that if game. Well, if this works out, and if that works out, and the NFC South should be bad. So I can look at the schedule and see 11 to 12 wins. And then I remember who's coaching on the sideline, and he is still. And I only say that in the way that he's still unproven to me. He has to prove it to me that he can do it.
Yeah.
The draft picks, they have to prove to me that they can do it. That kind of thing. So then I find myself leaning back more towards, I'm not going to call it a 2000 season or a 2006 season. Or even a 2017 season where you came in with pretty much no expectations. I almost feel, and again, I was fairly young, but I almost feel like a 1987 where you suffered through a few years of mediocrity. Obviously 20 years of mediocrity or worse. But through the 80s, through those Bum Phillips years, you felt like the team was close and that they were just missing something significant. And that's what I felt like these Saints teams have been the last 2 years. Sean Payton's last year, that walking wounded, with zero offensive weapons after Michael Thomas went down, and Kamara, even Kamara playing out of his mind. Sean Payton still almost got him to the playoffs. Last year, that unbelievable defensive effort over the last half of the season. But in both those teams, there was something significant missing. Have those pieces, have those questions been answered this offseason? And I mean, we'll have all summer to debate on this fact. But yeah, this feels almost like a 1987 or maybe a 2017, where you had your 3 straight years of 7 and 9, and you knew you had the talent on one side of the ball to make it. Maybe if these things fall right, you could be a Super Bowl contender. And then lo and behold, everything fell right. I see that kind of potential. I like the team this much, at least on paper at this point.
And we're going to talk a lot more about this next week, because it's odd. Almost zero of the schedule has been leaked. Usually by this time, at least by Wednesday, you're getting good hints on who's going to be playing overseas. It's going to be one of these 3 teams or 3 sets of teams that's going to be playing overseas. And we did get the Germany comment. And I think that counts as a home game too. It's a road game.
If the rumors are correct, and it is New England, and they'll play New England in Germany. If that is correct, the Patriots were going to be an away game, so at least they don't get robbed of a game inside the dome.
Yeah. So and the other story came out, and we'll see more by next week. But the other story came out. One of the proposals is that the league is going to do away with AFC, NFC divisions, conferences for networks. That networks are going to be able to grab the games they want to show. So, you're going to see more AFC teams on Fox and more NFC teams on CBS, which I guess it's not a bad thing, because you at least get to hear different announcers. But some of the other things I've heard, that they may have a couple of teams get a couple of Thursday night games. Which, if you've noticed now, and I don't know if you have, but I've noticed since the Thursday night game and Sunday night games have kind of diminished Monday Night Football.
Very much so.
Monday Night Football is not a big deal anymore. And I remember it wasn't that long ago. If you played a Monday Night Football, that was the major game or one of the major games. And I can think of a handful of games that were huge on Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
Bears Dolphins 85. Jets versus I think it was Miami. The big comeback, and I think that was 2001. It might have been 2000. I don't remember what year that was. That was the one where Jumbo Elliott caught the touchdown pass from Vinny Testaverde.
Yeah, I remember watching the game. I don't remember which of the 2 years it was, though.
It's got to be 2000 because I was still living in Lafayette at the time. In fact, my wife was mad at me because I put the game on in the bedroom. She's trying to sleep, and I said, I just want to watch this last series. And all of a sudden, the Jets started coming back. I'm like, holy crap, this is a great game.
Mm-hmm.
And she turn this off. I'm trying to sleep, Um, but you used to see some great games on Monday Night Football. You really don't anymore. Monday Night Football, I can go and not watch it for a whole season. If it wasn't for the Peyton and Eli stuff, I probably wouldn't watch any of Monday Night Football today. Sunday Night Football is much bigger, a much better game generally than Monday Night Football.
Yeah, and the league has clearly geared it that way. They advertise it as such. They like you said, they set up what they think to the best of their ability are the best matchups when they set the schedule, and they even introduced flex scheduling, so that way they could juggle late season matchups. I hate flex scheduling, but I guess I see why they do it. And like you said, it's not unless the Saints are playing on Monday night, it's not unusual for me to not watch a game at all. Another game at all. Ironically, I tuned in for Cincinnati Buffalo because that looked like such a big game, to unfortunately watch that tragedy unfold. But other than that, I might flip on if it's an opponent that has to do with the Saints in the standings, that affects the Saints in the standings. I'll flip on to catch a score, but I'll watch very little of the games.
Yeah, and it's weird how that's become. Monday Night Football has been so diminished, and I hate Thursday Night Football. I really, really do, because
Same.
I think it's a terrible thing for players and players' health. Just because it's too much material. Thanksgiving games, I'm good with.
Oh yeah,
that tradition. That's just one game, though. It's not like every week. And Amazon, I thought, did an okay job, but I thought there was too much Amazon advertisement during the damn game, so it really didn't hold my interest. And that's just kind of how I feel about the games in general. And like I said, we're going to talk a hell of a lot more about this tomorrow, and not tomorrow, next week, once the schedule's out, and we can kind of predict how the Saints season may turn out based off the schedule as of right now. But I'm like you, I go back and forth. I feel like we upgraded at quarterback. I feel like we've got better depth on offense than we had in a while. I'm worried always about the defense. Did we see their best ever, last year? And I felt the same way in 2020, beginning of 2022, after 2021 season. How much longer can guys like Cam Jordan and Demario Davis keep going? But
nobody's talking about that, but that worries me a lot.
Sure. I mean, they're both on the wrong side of 30, and it happens fast. A player like Cam Jordan shouldn't be going as long as he's been going at a high level. I look at almost every defensive end, even Will Smith. They all showed, and Wayne Martin too. They all showed signs of decline towards the end. Now, Joe Johnson, injuries did him in. That's what happened to him. But regardless, I worry about that. But I feel like they brought in enough young talent around them that another season, we're not depending on Demario Davis and Cam Jordan to carry this defense like we were in previous years. I just want Cam Jordan to get a ring. I really do. He deserved one in 2018, and it was stolen from him. I need for him to get his ring before he retires. I do not want him to go the Ricky Jackson route and go become a mercenary over there playing for the Eagles or the 49ers or someone like that, just to get that ring. All right. Bob, what do you have going on the Bayou Blitz tomorrow night?
Well, I was trying to nail down the legendary Mike Detillier to join us. Mike texted me just a little bit ago while we were on the show, as a matter of fact, that unfortunately he's going to be too busy to join us. Surprise, surprise, it's the busiest man in America.
Oh, absolutely.
So I promise you we'll get Mike either on here or the Bayou Blitz or both sometime this off season, but it won't be tomorrow. So y'all are stuck with Brendan and I. I gave Brendan the week off last week to be with family. So we didn't have a Bayou Blitz last week. So it'd be good to get caught up with him. And we'll do a lot of the same things. You and I were talking about tonight. We're going to kind of focus on which Saints draft picks we think are going to have the biggest impact. We're going to talk about potential bust. We think that by airtime tomorrow, we're going to have some schedule leaks or at least confirmation on that Germany date. So we'll talk about that. I'm not too fired up about the schedule release, other than I wish they'd get this the damn thing released already, so that way I could start to make my own travel plans to cover these games. But we're hoping we'll have some schedule news tomorrow for you on the Bayou Blitz.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah, we're going to be running out of topics real soon because, the way the schedule should go, we have rookie minicamp this week, then the OTA start, and that goes on until like the second week of June when they have the last minicamp. The entire roster's together for one minicamp, and then it's a 6-week break until training camp. So get your swimsuits ready. It's almost summer. It's 80 degrees out here already. I don't know what it's like up where you are, but it's the mid 80s and raining in the afternoon down here. So it feels like summer already. Thank you guys for joining us, and join Bob on the Bayou Blitz for more talk just like tonight. And guys, if there's stuff you want us to talk about during the summer doldrums in the off season, shoot us a message on our Facebook page, either Bayou Blitz or Under the Dome, or shoot us a thing on a comment on Twitter, or even in here. I'm scrambling for topics sometimes. I really am. So really appreciate it, and thank you guys for joining us again, and we'll see you next time on Under the Dome. Good night, everybody.
Good night.